The TED conference was interesting, not because it was a better conference, and I didn't make it by doing the opposite. I just subtracted a lot of stuff that people were kept on doing. So some things are better because you subtract out of them.
Feel like David Letterman on his Netflix show today, guys? Our next guest needs no introduction, but I will introduce him anyway. Richard Saul Wurman is the creator of the TED Conference, which he ran from 1984 until 2002. He is considered the father of information architecture and has written over 90 books on various topics. That's 90, 9-0.
I'm going to interrupt you. The more famous you are, the shorter the introduction.
Well, I will wrap things up on that note.
And when I give speeches and somebody starts what you were doing then, and I know you have to do it for your program because besides your either acting excitement or real excitement of having me on, doesn't make any difference.
It's real.
Yeah. There's only a thread of people that know me. I'm well below the radar. You know me, and then if you know me and you like some of the things, then I'm somebody in your eyes. Trust me, I can walk down any street in America and nobody knows who I am. I got more phone calls when I was an answer on Jeopardy than I've ever gotten from any book I've done.
Wow.
I mean, the solution to many problems, I won't say most because I don't know statistically if it's most, but a considerable number of problems are solved by looking to see if there's a radical alternative, whether you can do the absolute opposite, whether it's an interesting enough problem to solve that it has an opposite. So Niels Bohr, who was a Danish Nobel Prize winner, physicist, friend of Einstein, but had bitter discussions with him because of quantum physics and regular physics, et cetera. He said when he got his Nobel, he said, when I have a profound idea, I realize that the opposite is also profound. Now, if you go through life understanding what opposites are in all walks of life as a way of revealing things, putting a camera on the back of your car so you can see who you run over when you back up, that is not innovation. That's not an opposite. That's just a marginal change in your many things that you think are terrific ideas are just making something a little better. The TED conference was interesting, not because it was a better conference, and I didn't make it by doing the opposite. I just subtracted a lot of stuff that people were kept on doing. So some things are better because you subtract out of them. You take away the lectern. You take away the dress code. You take away panel. You take away having only one subject. You take away clique groups and special lunches. You take away things, and all of a sudden, strip down, the conference is about people talking to the audience, right? You take away rehearsals. It's not such a big thing, but that's one way of innovation. Another way is doing the opposite. My guidebooks, instead of having a chapter on one subject, chapter on hotels, a chapter on restaurants, a chapter on hotels, or whatever the things are, I mixed them all up and put them, all the entries next to each other as they would be in a word map. So you got a hotel and maybe there was a restaurant next by, maybe there was a museum. So when you went to your hotel, you could see what was close by, where you could eat close by. You didn't have to go up to the concierge and say, where can I eat nearby? Which we do when we check into a hotel. And I just changed the color of type. So you could scan down a page and see in this area where all the restaurants are, where the museums are, what was near the museum, what was near a famous building, and that it just was a word map. It was it was organizing the same information in a different way, and it creates new information and new patterns. All very, very, clarifying ideas. And
Richard, let's take that for a second. You spent your life in curiosity and simplifying the complex again and again across your work. You're simplifying the complex. And as you said,
I don't use the word simplify because there is a simplification movement out there. What it does is you can take a form that's crowded with stuff, take things away off of the form and say, I've simplified it. But she's also dumbed it down. So the work I do is dense, but you can easily find a path through it. You don't have to take things away. I believe in understanding. I believe in a lot of facts and but I just give me a better roadmap.
Yeah.
Don't take it away. Simplify. The word basically means take away.
Would you say that you have an insatiable curiosity?
No. We all have that. What I have is I have embraced my stupidity. I've embraced the fact that I'm not that smart, but I'm curious. And I've embraced that that's a way of having interesting days. If you say something or you hear something, you stop and you look it up and you try to see if it connects to other things in your life. I'll tell you a little story. I went to London, and you can now take the tube into London from the airport. And I took the tube in, and I got up and I started to cross the street, and I looked the wrong way and almost got hit by a bus. And I looked the wrong way because of the traffic patterns of driving the opposite direction. I almost got hit by a London bus. And it came to a harsh stop and got hit in its back by a Volkswagen Beetle, right? Now, the bus is it was smaller then, but it's the size and weight of a whale, maybe a blue whale. Blue whale is the biggest mammal we have. In fact, the tongue of the blue whale is as big as the beetle. And the heart of it is about the same size as the tongue. And the ventricle going into the blue whale's heart, you can walk through, right?
Oh my gosh.
At the same time, when that Volkswagen, the people's car, was being built in Nazi Germany, well, the car was built in 1935, which was the year that an extraordinary gentleman died in a plane crash in Chile. And the planes didn't take off. He was playing chicken with another plane, and they crashed on a runway.
Yikes.
And his name was Carlos Gardel. And he's still known to every Argentinian. He's the most famous person in Argentina now, but you don't know who he is. And he invented the tango, the music and the dance of the tango. Now, the tango is interesting because in that dance, which people will just get up. If you go through Argentina and you go to a little square in a shady part of town, there'll be sometimes people dancing the tango in the middle of the day. It's really part of the culture. Men and men, women and women, men and women. It breaks all the rules. It's very strict rules, but a lot of improvisation during it. There's love in it. There's hate in it. They embrace, but they pull apart and stay apart. It's filled with opposites.
Mm.
And it has lasted as a dance on the feet of still perhaps the most famous person in Argentina, who died in 1935, which was the year I was born.
Mm.
I just told you a story that I've told 20 times, every time differently. Everything in it is factual, but it's a made-up story. I was never going to be hit by a bus. There was never the accident. The facts are correct, but the story isn't. Now, what is interesting about that story? It was obviously a lot of disjointed material, right? I mean, think of all the subjects I touched. We can try this in a month. I can ask you, and you can tell me the facts of that story back again.
I'm still trying to get over the fact that you told us a made-up story, Richard. I'm reeling over here.
Because I'm making a point. I told you a story where everything was connected.
Mm-hmm.
And therefore your memory, it's cemented in your head. You know,
I can read them back to you, the ones that just off the top of my head. Do you
I know, but you'll be able to do it in a month.
Okay.
Our whole educational system is based on being forced to memorize sometimes many things you're not interested in and be tested on it, and then forget it because it's short-term memory when you're forced to memorize, and then go on to the next subject. Memory is everything that counts. If you have no memory, if I wipe your slate clean in your head, you basically, in a certain human definition, you don't exist. What we are is 5'8", 5'10", 5'6" of memory. We're nothing else but our memory. Our hands work because of memory. I know how to pick up my glasses. Everything is the memory that's in there. It's not memorized, and it's long-term memory. If we said to the educational system it had to be based on things you were interested in and connect to other things, it would be an entirely different system. 2 or 3 of the biggest siloed subjects in a university are based on memorize. Law, you have to memorize your torts. You don't have to be so smart. You have to have a good way. You can memorize things. Somebody who's good in the theater can memorize Shakespeare. It could be a good lawyer because law is a lot about that and a little less about the tactics. Now, that tactics is what's important. That you can teach, a strategy. But the other shit is going to be thrown out the window, already has been basically, by AI. In medicine, So we're going to see within the next decade, certainly, a revolution in the teaching, the learning that goes on in several of the major disciplines.
I would say there's a broad conversation that's emerged. There's no need to memorize anything anymore. There's no point.
No, you have to understand how to find it.
Yeah.
So a significant part of our society is to find it things. One of the biggest jobs I worked on, which probably isn't even on my bio, was I worked on the redesign of when there were yellow pages. That was a very big part of our life. Yellow pages. That's the way you found everything. Mm-hmm. You forgot about the yellow pages. Mm-hmm. There was no way of finding anything except the yellow pages, right? See, we've already forgotten that, and after that, we forgot the taxes, right? But I mean, there's a lot of things that come and go. But they were critical. The Sears catalog was the find it book that all married couples used. The Sears catalog. You couldn't find how to buy anything without the Sears catalog.
And I want to go back to AI for a second, which you mentioned. Now, you wrote 2 books, and I correct me if I get the dates wrong, but you wrote a book called Information Anxiety in 1989, and I believe you wrote Information Anxiety 2 in 2002 to really address what had happened in the digital age.
Is Sir Berners-Lee invented the World Wide Web, and Tim did that. And when Tim did that, I had to have a chapter and have that filter into some of the other chapters because that was revolutionary. It's more or less the same book with that filtered into a river of that into the chapters because it was that big a difference.
My understanding is a basic argument in that book is that there's this explosion of information and it's reduced the actual amount of knowledge that we possess because there's a lot of facts, there's a lot of answers, but our ability to make sense of it. So I wanted to ask you specifically, how would you think about it now in this moment where AI has begun and is taking off and is changing the way we live, the way we work, and inundating us with so much more content and information than ever before?
Okay, let me go 2 steps back. In the cover of the first edition, I say there hasn't been an information explosion. Many people see information anxiety and it's that information anxiety is caused by the information explosion. No, it's the explosion of non-information. I believe that I can't be overloaded by things that are understandable that I'm interested in. Now, everything we see in print, everything that's printed, everything in the newspaper, we think of as information. But if it doesn't inform, it doesn't tell you where it takes place or how big it is or anything else. I mean, we can take a test if we have a newspaper here. I can get you today's Wall Street Journal. I've done this so many times, I've never lost. You take any major story there, and the person who wrote it knew about the story, obviously. And they couldn't understand what it was like not to understand. So they never really tell you where it takes place. I certainly didn't know where Kiev is, even though my family came from Ukraine, until the Ukraine war. And then I still don't know if there was a blank map with just borders on it, whether I could pick it out. If you don't know where you are, that's the first place. You want to know where you are. Everything takes place someplace. Normally that's left out of the beginning of a story. Left out by name, left out by not having an illustration or a map, left out by not even know what country you're in. Numbers are sometimes, and the budget went down $1 trillion. Do you know what $1 trillion is? No, you don't. In fact, you can't understand what $1 trillion is. I can explain to you what $1 trillion is with as much clarity as I've seen happen, and you don't understand what it is. I'll do a quick version of it. If in the year 0, there's a Mr. and Mrs. Schultz, Berg had this little mom and pop store, and they opened it in the year 0, and they had everything in this store, but they were terrible business people. So the first year they lost 1 million shekels, and the second year 1 million shekels, and the third year 1 million shekels. And the fourth year was a leap year, so they lost 1,365,000,000 shekels the first 3 years, and the fourth year, 366 million shekels. Every day of every year, they lost $1 million. They lost $1 million. They were bad businessmen, as bad business people as they were. They had long life. So they're still alive today. They're 2023 plus 20 years because they were married at whatever, 20. Up till today, they still would not have lost $1 trillion, even though they lost $1 million every day of every year for 2023 years. They would still have to be alive another 438 years or something. So you don't know what $1 trillion is. It's
crazy.
Is that crazy?
Yeah, when it's just crazy that those are numbers that the normal human will never deal with.
I'm wrong with the 438. I don't change it over the years when I tell the story, and I forget how many years you still have to be alive. But you can sit down and do it on your iPhone, do the arithmetic, drop off zeros, get to $1 trillion. But you still have to be alive for another few hundred years from now to lose $1 trillion.
It's an important point, Richard, to say the average human doesn't have the ability to comprehend numbers like that because they have no interactions with numbers like that.
No, there's nothing compared. So you only understand something relative to something you understand.
Mm-hmm.
And when numbers or sizes get bigger than you can put relative to your understanding, like any stories about space, you really are shaking your head at it. That's all. You don't really understand. We can't comprehend it.
Let's jump from something we can't comprehend to something everyone can comprehend. At 45, after being wildly successful, you said, in your own words, that you were a destitute failure. Now, every person on the planet goes through failure. They go through periods in their life where they crash and burn.
I wasn't a big success. I was never a big success. And up until then, I had a little office in Philadelphia with maybe at their height, maybe 15, 20 people, an architectural practice with 2 partners. And we weren't making it, partly because of my personality, because I'm abrasive. No, I'm abrasive. I'm abrasively charming. So it's, but partly because 2 of the 3 of us were Jewish, and the people who were giving out work, the city of Philadelphia, and the chairman of who was head of the planning department, and the head of the city planning commission, who was dean at the School of Penn, didn't particularly like us. So I was a top student at Penn. I was a success there. I had the highest average, took more courses than anybody took, got the gold medal in design, all the stuff you're supposed to. I was the golden boy. But I wasn't, we weren't making it. We weren't bankrupt, so we didn't have any debts, but we just closed the office because we weren't moving. We plateaued. And I had to begin again. But I left and went to the West Coast with my tail between my legs for just a semester to get out of Philadelphia to start up again. I was going to open up a soup kitchen. And, but I went and I taught, I know people, I could get people on the phone, and I called somebody at UCLA and USC, and they gave me a job as a visiting professor for a semester. And I went west. But it wasn't as a success. I had done a bunch of books then, but I'm mostly self-published. Nobody's ever asked me to do a book, ever. And nobody's ever asked me to do a conference, ever. So it sounds wonderful. Oh, God, I so envy you because you don't have clients. Well, yeah, that's to be envied. But I'll tell you, it is much nicer to be wanted. But I haven't I've been fired from a number of jobs. I was fired when I was dean of a school. For a year, I was fired. But no, I know our world is based on 3 words, money, power, money, power, fame, money, power. I have an ego. I love articles on me, and there's a lot written about me. I do no press. I do no PR, but there's always been a lot written about me. But I'm not famous, and I can make that point. You can make that point. Just ask the next 20 people you know who's Richard Saul Wurman. They'll say, what? I didn't hear it. Wurman, W-E-R-M-A-N? Soul? You're not going to get any reaction, honestly. That's the fame part.
So you were asked a direct question a moment ago
about
a moment in your life where you were... you felt like a failure. And what I want to add to that...
I did fail. I failed. My architect, I still have a black hole in my
stomach. And we're very interested in how do people reinvent themselves when they're in the hole? How do they climb out? And how do we help them climb out?
I think that's a good... I don't want to help you. I understand the question. I'm listening to you. Do you want me to respond to what you say? I'm not trying to get you to laugh. I'm trying to answer you as honestly as can come out of my mouth.
I would love that. Yes.
My simple goal in life is I am motivated, obsessed with trying to do good work. Often when I do good work, it has an effect on other people. They learn from it. I don't copyright my work. If I have an idea, it's theirs. So if I really if I don't take time away from doing good work to think about other people and whether they'll like me or like it, I'm just obsessed with trying to come up with clarity for me, because you don't know what I'm thinking right now. I don't know what you're thinking. The only thing we come close to knowing anything about is our own head. And we don't even know that so well. But that's as good as it gets. If that's as good as it gets, that's my meter. So I try to do good work based on what I think good work at the moment is, of understanding, of clarity, of making the complex clear in my own head. Some of it becomes useful. Some of it probably doesn't. I didn't have a committee choose speakers. Some of the speakers, well, probably certainly 25% of the speakers, if I thought about them, I thought whether the audience would like them or not, I knew absolutely they wouldn't like them so much. They were just, I had them there because it got me a chance to hear from that person. So it wasn't done for the ratings. People didn't have to come to the TED conference. I didn't advertise it. It was totally and completely viral marketing. I tried to make it better than expectations, even if he had been there before. I succeeded, and then I got bored a bit. And then I sold it, and then I missed it.
Mm-hmm.
Are you aware I did a book called Understanding Understanding?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Do you have it, or have you seen it?
I saw it at the
Don't have
Nantucket
it.
Project. I don't own it, but we flipped through it a little bit together.
Okay. So I realize there's a step before understanding, and it's explaining. There is no subject that is explained to me. And if I go to the expert, to the person that has the most difficulty explaining something, because as we've said before, that the people who have expertise cannot get their arms around what it's like not to understand. They can't understand that. They just know so much about it. They can only get you in the third floor. They can't get you in the front door because they can't even imagine you not understanding. When I need help on my iPhone, people, anybody certainly 30 years of age or younger are laughing at me because I'm so stupid. And they understand how to do things, and they go like this, and I still don't understand because they can't even imagine my stupidity. Well, of course you push that button, you do this and you do that. People who know how to use the iPhone well can't tell somebody else. They can do it. I'm not taking away from their expertise, but they can't tell me. And a lawyer can't tell me, and a doctor can't tell me. My wealth management people can't tell me. They talk in initials, and they can't understand what it's like not to understand those initials because that's part of their language. That's like a word for them. So there's X number of modalities of how to explain things for every subject. You can make a film, obviously. You can make a video. You can have a conversation. Probably both of you don't know how to make a good phone call. People who come up on stage don't know how to speak to the audience. We aren't given the tools and the possibility and the availabilities of the different modalities for us to choose from and choose and have a way of choosing which is the most appropriate one for the information that we want to convey or the feelings we want to convey. Or maybe it's silence. How do you convey something to another person? And how do you learn enough about those? You don't have to learn how to do animated films or computer generated design, but you ought to know what it can do if you ask of it. I don't know how to build a refrigerator, but I know if I want to keep my food cold, I have to have a refrigerator. I know what to ask for. So we have to understand the availabilities and how to get them. And so we can explain and get through life. And that is not in the ground floor of any university in the United States. You're tested from the beginning. And the last person you want to get anything explained is the head of the schools. And so it is likely that there'll be something set up in Massachusetts, like the Wurman Institute of explaining.
Oh, wow.
Identifies the various modalities that people can have in any field, not the subject of the field, but what different modalities are able to convey. Also, comparative information was the basis of that story, of the story about the London bus. Because everything through it, I was telling you something compared to something else.
Mm.
placing you in London, knowing, telling you how I got into London, going off the sidewalk. I was giving you a film that takes place over time. That's an interesting way of, because people remember stories better than they remember facts. And you only understand something if it's compared to something you understand, because that's the stick it note. You can peel it off, but it sticks for a little bit so you can get someplace else, right? It doesn't have to.
So we talk about matching the message to the medium, right? So there's two constructs here, right? There's one, when do I send a text? When do I send an email? When do I FaceTime? When do I Zoom? In addition to that, what you're talking about is how do you understand, how do you get good at these various modalities?
I think it's more subtle than what you're saying. I think it's much richer than if you do that, you do that. I think it's much more of an art form than that. It's a much deeper process to go through. That if you have that, you do that. It's if you have that, you have the choice of doing these three things, and you might want to do this if it's that, and this if you do that. It's a rich part of our life. How do we communicate with another human being? It's much more complicated than a rule book. I'm not giving you a rule book. If I had a rule book, somebody else would have written it.
So how do you imagine teaching this? The subtlety, the nuance?
I wouldn't teach anything. I just know that it's an idea. It's an idea that hasn't happened. Lucan said a good idea that doesn't happen is no idea at all. So there's no idea at all yet. It would be nice to have that. It would be nice 20 years ago to have that ability. It's always an issue of how one human being communicates with another in different cultures. And some things, if you're deaf, or in other things, the mudra, the hands, they have a lot of our face. I read faces fairly well. There is a science of reading faces. I don't do it scientifically, but for 18 years, I sat on the stage of TED for a week, once a year, and looked at 500,000 people. I wasn't looking at the speaker. I wasn't looking at their slides or whatever they had. I was looking at the audience. And I read their faces of what they understood, because that interested me. And I knew this was a golden opportunity to read faces of whether somebody is understanding you or just calling it in, or is really interested, or is waiting to say the next question, or interrupt you, or thinks you're a piece of shit and would you just shut up, or I'm bored out of my head. There's so many other things.
Let me ask you about belonging in community. You spent a lot of your life creating these conferences that bring people together, that they feel some sense of community, some connection, some belonging. And many times they feel compelled to do big things, come up with big ideas, possibly change the world. So you figured out some secret sauce to bringing people together to build this thing called a community.
You flatter me by thinking I have a plan. You flatter me. I just told you my plan. Do good work. I did the conference I wanted to go to. My life is much simpler than you think it is. I'm much less sophisticated than you think. I do things so I can experience them, because they don't exist. The only books I do is because I can't find somebody else who did a book on it that I understood. So it isn't the other thing. It isn't a great plan of bringing people together. Bringing people together and getting them 500 people and then 1,000 people to come and pay me money was greed. I could get a wonderful experience. Those years of running conferences were an irreplaceable experience for me in my life. It not only improved all the audience's Rolodex, if you know what a Rolodex was, but it improved my Rolodex. So I know people in every field of life because I invited people from every field of life. I can pick up the phone and call Yo-Yo Ma, and I can call up Norman Lear, and I can call up, I don't know, just name names. You can call up, I know people from everywhere in every field. That's all. It was just self-serving. And I said, if you do good work and it's self-serving, some others might see a pattern in it and benefit, but it wasn't for them.
What made it such an attractive community, though? What got people to come there and love it the way they did? I understand that you're saying you did it for you.
It was so good that people told their friends. Some people told me, people said that they had a hard time going home because they had such a good time. Their wife thought they weren't at a business meeting, which is what they were, they were going for business. Well, it was for business. That's how many people got it paid out of a business account. But they had such a good time. You're not supposed to have a good time. But then people said they wouldn't tell other people because they wanted to be able to get a seat the next year.
Were you able to enjoy it while you were there, or did it almost feel like a wedding where you're just, so preoccupied with the mechanics that it's hard to be fully present? How was it for you actually being there and experiencing it when it was going on?
I've never been asked that question. It's good to be king. That's a quote from Mel Brooks. Mel Brooks. It's good to be king. In one of his movies. Yeah, it was that. It was kind of, I was king for a week. I was a nobody. I was a little schmucko architect from Philadelphia. I didn't have anything, but I knew how to do that. I wasn't taught. You're not taught. Nobody is taught how to do a conference. I just happened to know how to do that. And I gave in to the fact that I would want to go. I would have been very happy to be in the audience, except I would be very jealous of the person on the stage.
Interesting.
By the way, that's a very positive outward message to people. It's something I said I don't do, but it's a positive message out there. Embrace the things that give you greater comfort. Not that you know how to do necessarily, but that you are unsatisfied with ever doing it good enough. That's how much you respect it. I think the person who cuts diamonds is never satisfied. They always want the next challenge, bigger diamond or a different cut. There's just no satisfaction. So I think doing the conference, it's when people, I expected a standing ovation in the end. I always got a standing ovation, but I thought they came expecting this to be the best conference they were ever at. So if it wasn't that, it was a failure. There was no pleasure when I was finished. It was as good as it was what I was supposed to do. That is my job then. So there's no pleasure of just doing your job. And there's no winning doing it really well. There's losing when you fail.
Were you way outside of your comfort zone? Was it scary for you to push all the time, push?
I'm going to give you a strange answer to that. For my I had a series of 75th birthday parties all around. I had decided it was a big deal to be 75. When I was 80 and up to 80, my wife was tired of me being 75. So at 80, though, I wanted to have a birthday party. I wanted to do something special. And my wife said, "You've had all the birthday parties you have for the rest of your life. You don't need any more." She went to New York with the kids for my birthday. And I was in Newport. So I said, okay, I'll throw my own birthday party. So I invited Yo-Yo Ma, he's the celloist, right? And Frank Gehry, the architect, Moshe Zafti, the architect, and John Kamen, who's head of Radical Media. He did Fog of War. He has a lot of Academy Awards and things. You might not know his name, but he owns Radical Media. And I asked him to come to Newport. And Moshe came back a day early from Abu Dhabi, where he was on a job. Frank chartered an airplane from the West Coast. John drove over from New York, but he had a meeting the next morning at 7:30, so we had to come up to Newport, get a few hours sleep, and drive back. And Yo-Yo came from Carnegie Hall. He gave an afternoon concert and came up to Newport, right? I said, we're going to sit around, talk for about 9, have some wine. I have a friend who owns a really good vineyard, Chapelet Vineyards, and she sent me some cases of really good wine. And I invited these people to come, and I said, we drink for a while, then we talk for about 90 minutes, and then we go out for a really great meal. So they all came. And the week or so before, I didn't announce it, but a week or so before, I mentioned it to people on the phone. So about 50, 60 other people came. And I said, if you come, I'm going to lock the door at 6. That's it. It's over, 7, whatever. And then the night before, I said, well, we should have to begin this thing. How do we begin it tomorrow? I said to myself in one of my gardens. And I came up with an idea. And the acronym was EAT, because I know it culminated with a great dinner we were going to have. Incredible fish that was just caught. I had somebody specially bring it in from Boston of seafood and fish. And EAT is the acronym for envy, A, admiration, and T, terror. I was going to get to your point, and I did. And I asked that of these gentlemen that were all overachievers, what do they feel now, looking back in the rearview mirror, of how their attitude towards those 3 words have stayed the same or changed? I'll get to your question now. Your question about is terror. The one thing everybody agreed on is that they were always still terrified. I think if you lose your terror, you've lost it. You can't do any work.
You
Terror is
still
a
want to be
friend.
terrified at 88? Is terror something you still desire?
Oh yeah, this phone call is terrifying. Every time I speak, it's terrifying.
Really?
Well, I've given a lot of speeches in my life, and I use no slides, and I have no notes, and I don't take any notes ever. And that was something I learned at school. I took more courses than anybody's taken, I believe, before or since at Penn, because I had a special permission from the dean that if I kept an A- average, I could take as many courses as I wanted. So I took basically, I said I'd take all the courses I had to, but then I went to school every day, every night, including Saturdays. And I was just in school all the time, just period. I was in school. And I realized if you reverse engineer that, the only reason to take notes is to study from your notes. There's no other reason. If you don't study, if you don't use them again, there's really to take them. And I didn't have any time to study. So there's no reason to take notes. So I spent my time learning about listening. That's all I do. I graduated first.
Richard, we know you love acronyms, and I came up with an acronym for your last name. Would you like to hear it?
Oh, you're going to hear it. When you ask somebody a question like that, I could say no, and then you'd still tell me.
No, I would respect it. I would respect it.
Oh,
okay.
You squash your ambition right now by saying no.
Okay, then we'll pivot on and we'll go to the speed round. No problem.
The pain.
The first question I have is, what were the insights that came out of envy, admiration, and terror? Just give us a couple.
Less envy, increased admiration, and the same terror.
TED was created on the realization that technology, entertainment, and design were converging. And that seems obvious now, but it wasn't then. Where do you see convergence now that may not be obvious to us?
What a good question. That's a good question. That the excitement, the terror, the concern that it's going to ruin things or change the way of life or do all this about AI, to me, is like silly. Mm-hmm. It's not, it's another tool. And you dialed the dial up. Everything we've had, the Encyclopedia Britannica was a tool. I mean, would Encyclopedia Britannica in its final form not be magic to Abraham Lincoln? All that and all those pages, my God, and they put out a new volume every year. They update it. They have all these people doing, and that's the last of the gasp of collecting information. Siri is now so much better than it was, really. Siri was introduced at a TED conference. If you look at, there's a chapter by Kai-Fu Lee wrote a chapter for the understanding. It was not a chapter. He didn't write it. I think it was a phone call that I recorded. And the chapter is about, and this is a lot about failure and about TED and about change. It answers some of your questions all at once. I invited John Scully to come to TED. I told you he was a big deal. And this is the year he came that I told you. And he came up the aisle, sitting on a stair, and he gave a talk. And across the stage from him was Kai-Fu Lee, sitting at a little Apple computer then. And he started speaking to it, and it was called Casper, a program called Casper. And he talked to it, and it talked back and did some answer. The audience was thunderstruck. It was just crazy. Now, let me tell you the backstory. He came to TED started on a Thursday or Friday. Earlier that week, before he came, the board voted to bankrupt the company or to sell off parts of Apple, that it was not making it. And he said, please, one last favor for me. I will do it Monday. I want to go. I've been invited to talk. This is how important TED was. I want to go to the TED conference because I'm going to speak, and I really want to do that. I don't want to do that announcement before I go there. Can I do it Monday? He came to the TED conference to give a speech, and he was going to bankrupt the company Monday. Not bankrupt, but sell off the parts or try to get somebody to buy it. He did this presentation, and by Sunday, his phone was ringing off as the hook, et cetera. And he flew across country and was on Monday's Good Morning America, because what he did on the stage at TED with his Casper, which they had to rename because it wasn't named Siri then. It was, they called it something else. They thought it was magic. And the stock went like that.
I want to ask you, One final question, Saul. Much of your life's work.
No, I want to know I want to know the acronym for Wurman.
Oh, you're back. We're back.
Okay. The acronym for Wurman, and for the audience, Wurman is WURMAN. W, wonder. U, understanding. R, radical. M, maps. A, architecture. And N, nuisance.
So it's for Wurman. Would you text me that? I would love to have that.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I'll get another N word.
Okay. So the last question is, a lot of your life's work has been about changing how things have been done. Because it's bothered you in some way or because it didn't make sense. What's something that you would love to change, challenge the status quo, or reinvent now?
One is give clarity to the word memory and memorize, and have a revolution someplace in the educational system and drop the word education. Have a board of understanding, not a board of education.
Love that.
You know, education basically is a book that has dots at the end of the chapter for the questions that the class has to answer for that chapter. You're given a textbook that was approved by a group in Texas. I mean, it's a foolish thing. Our education system is foolish. So that's one thing. The other thing is I have an idea of a gathering that gives beauty to an underutilized word. About a third of our body is our backs, our shoulders and our backs. And if you get a pimple on it, or you have a hair on your back, or whatever you have on your back, you never see it. Squeeze the pimple, you don't see your back. And yet, if I put another word with it, which is with shoulders, you stand on people's shoulders, you rub shoulders. That the things that come into you, which they stay through your shoulders, because I guess it's the idea of a working person, a laborer, and standing on somebody's shoulders to get you higher. Rubbing shoulders or purposely not rubbing certain people's shoulders is a non-egocentric view of who you are. It's what you've absorbed from others, good and bad, rather than not copied, but absorbed to make you could become an architect, but get that stuff in from a musician. You could get it in from somebody who has nothing to do with your field of interest or study, but it's changed your way of looking at something, or hearing things differently, or seeing differently. And I think that revelation from some people I know, certain people I know, would be a wonderful thing to hear. When they think about it, whose shoulders do they... I brought up Socrates' name. I feel I stand on Socrates' shoulders. He never wrote anything. I'll never meet him. But I feel I stand on his shoulders. He takes me back to ancient Greece and somebody who just worshiped the question. So that's another something I would like to do. I think both of them are possible.
Thank you for your candor, your curiosity, for pursuing opposites, for your motivation to do good work, and obsession to create clarity.
Richard, where can people find you and learn more about your work?
There's a number of websites. My email address, and you can send me an email, is RSW, my initials, Richard Saul Wurman, RSW@Wurman, WURMAN.com. So it's RSW@Wurman.com. But you can just put Richard Saul Wurman up and you'll get some things. You can put Wurman, just my last name, and put the word DOTS on. You could say Wurman quotes, and you'll get a whole series of different sites of Wurman memorabilia, stuff like that. You can put Wurman cartography, Wurman TED. There's a bunch of sites that are whole websites that people have done about me. I haven't done any. But Richard Saul Wurman, there is not an up-to-date biography, but it was produced by my office some years ago. I haven't changed it. And then there's one film that you can get, I think, on YouTube that's called The Architect of Ideas. And it was produced by the Nantucket Project. And you saw it if you were at the Nantucket Project this year. I don't know if you saw it. It was up. They put it up the first day. Did you see it, or the second day?
Yes, I did. Yeah.
Well, that's a nice little film that Tommy did. And It was done a number of years ago, but it's just 11 minutes. And I think it's a nice little film.